Hi, I'm Hannah Durden and you're listening to the Outdoors Group podcast. This podcast is a call to arms to get children and young people outside again. It's your one-stop shop for all things outdoor, child, young person and education related. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Moose Mutlow, a man who has worn many hats in his lifetime. He has travelled around the globe as part of a diverse range of traditional and alternative education settings, from being a deputy head in the Kalahari Desert to teaching a canoe program to veterans in the Gulf of Mexico. These days, he can be found at Yosemite National Park as one of the senior trainers of their search and rescue team. His current project, however, involves the opening of the National Environmental Science Centre, and we're really looking forward to talking to him today about this. I've got two co-hosts with me today in the form of Shev and Tom, and thank you for joining me today, all three of you.
Hooray!
Thanks for inviting.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Moose, I thought we'd start by asking you to give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour of your career. I realised if we did it too deeply, we'd be here probably for a while. But how did you end up where you are now, and what exactly are you doing, and kind of what's led you there?
I got really lucky as a kid because my parents really encouraged me to be outside, and that was where I was fulfilled a lot. I wasn't the best kid in the classroom. I liked collecting fossils and figuring out what frogs were doing. And that transferred pretty much not getting into college when I left high school. And I took a job as a fishery officer working on a trout river, and then magically somehow managed to get the grades to go and do an environmental science degree. And that completely set me up for a career of just messing around, basically guiding.
Where did you do that? In the UK or the US?
In the UK, yeah, I did it down at Plymouth, and I did a teaching cert. I came back at the University of Bristol and got my teaching cert ultimately. But I love being in the outdoors, and I figured out a way to get a career, whether I was either in a boat or working in a zoo or working in Australia for Outward Bound, opened a lot of the doors. But it's really just been about making sure I had fun with purpose. I would say having fun with purpose. It's easy to be pretty hedonistic in the outdoor world and spew about all the things you've climbed or you paddled, but it doesn't mean anything unless you've shared it with somebody. And if you've actually shared it on a teaching level, I found it's a much more profound experience, and that's guided me throughout my life.
Certainly relate to that feeling.
Yeah, me too. Oh, yeah.
How did you end up where you are now then? Like what kind of led you there?
I had been working for North Carolina Outward Bound, which is on the east coast of the United States, for about a decade, playing the visa game. And I was set to leave. I was going to go in the Arctic and guide big trips, expeditions, and then go down to Baja in Mexico and sail. And an environmental education organization that I knew somebody at said, "Hey, why don't you interview for the education director job?" And I got that up in the Olympic Peninsula, which is in the northwest part of the lower 48 in the US, and they got me a green card. And from there, I've stayed with Nature Bridge, which is the largest provider of environmental ed in US national parks, for more than 20 years, either as an education director or what I do now as a senior project director.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Shev, what do you say?
I was just saying, what an awesome job.
Yeah, I loved up in the northwest. That's a rainforest. You're right by the ocean, and this forest just cascades out of this interior mountain massif, and it's remote, and it's got incredible cultural history. I lived right on a lake, and you had a really intimate campus. You had a campus with only maybe 10 or 12 instructors, and you all lived and worked around each other. And then I got promoted to Yosemite, which has 35, nearly 40 instructors, and runs 200 or 300 students a day through program, and it's a much bigger machine. But by then you're in Yosemite. You're in this place where a lot flows out of Yosemite. Yosemite isn't particularly remarkable in terms of landscape, because I've seen amazing landscapes with no people. Yosemite is quite busy, but Yosemite attracts a lot of attention, and so you get to do a lot of different things because of its profile.
When you say 200 students a day on program, what are they all doing? Different things across the park?
So most of our students come for 3 to 5 days, and they'll do hikes and do combinations of personal development and environmental science. So they might look at geology or do stream biomonitoring, or they might do a little bit of cultural history, but it's all revolving around ultimately trying to develop a stewardship ethic for students to take back. And we've been operating for about 50, I think it's our 51st year this year in National Park.
Awesome. You said like Yosemite is quite busy, and I kind of gone back through a few of your kind of podcasts and looked at some of the stuff you talk quite a lot about the use of wild spaces for learning. Is there a conflict there with the number of people in the park, or can you kind of overcome that?
Well, 95% of Yosemite is wilderness, so it's very closely governed. You have to have a permit. You can't just wander up and say, oh, I'm going to go have a picnic out here. You've got to go through the various hoops to get into those locations. But they talk a lot about loving Yosemite to death, and it has had. You can have 11,000 vehicles in a valley that's 7 miles long and 1 mile wide, and so you're stuck in traffic for 4 or 5 hours not moving. So they've done a few things with permitting now to try to open it up. But I struggle a bit with that, because ultimately, if people are coming to parks and using them, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And if you're taking this idea where we're going to have a lot of impact in this one location to save the greater area, that's not
Kind of
such a bad
honeypot.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
honeypot it. It's probably a similar thing I saw in the Lake District or seen in Wales, where you go, this is almost a sacrifice zone.
Sure.
But to deny people access isn't necessarily the way to preserve.
I think that's been an age-old kind of argument since the birth of national parks and nature reserves.
And the idea of national parks globally were born out of arguably the American idea, which Yosemite was found, it was actually signed up for protection during the American Civil War. And the idea is to preserve this land untrammeled by man, is one of the things they say in the Wilderness Act, which is not the national park founding pieces, but it's a guiding piece of legislation. But that's been a terrible mechanism for injustice, because it's removed the people who lived on that land, the people who've had a tribal interest in there for generations and helped form it. They were kicked out of the parks, and then we said, oh, look at this, it's just got animals in it. Whereas people lived in harmony in parks and formed the landscape for 1,000 years.
Yeah, integral part of the ecosystem. It's like it's removing an apex predator, effectively, isn't it? It doesn't make much sense in terms of ecology.
No, and it's a very westernized view of wild space. I think a look at a lot of the problems in African national parks. You just marginalize the people who lived in the parks, and then they live on the edge, and then the bushmeat trade strikes up because people need to eat, and the West comes down hard on it. It's like they're just trying to feed their families. It's not this hideous piracy. It's a desperate desire to try to live. And I struggle with us not thinking through impact of that. If national parks don't help locals, then you're not actually doing anything, because locals are the ones who are going to have the most impact if they're not best served.
I know in Australia they've done a lot of work to I can't think of what the actual term is, kind of giving back spaces and kind of recognizing the indigenous peoples and stuff. Like with the Yosemite, where you just said that there were people living there for a really long time, is there been a move to kind of give some of that land back for the people, like the ancestors of that land? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the land rights movement in Australia is a really interesting one. I really encourage people to look on it, because if you weren't shouting at South Africa for injustice, we would have been arguably shouting at Australia. The lands rights movement there has, and I'm not the person to sort of champion it by any means, but there's a lot of good stuff out there. Black Emu is a really good book to look at, particularly about what the land was like and how it was managed, particularly on the East Coast. But in the United States, the way in which land was divided up between tribal interests and along the lines of Manifest Destiny, perhaps in the US, there are tribes that have land rights, but within parks, there's very limited ability to rotate land back. There's land gifting. There's a big land purchase just happened south of us that gifted land, state land, ultimately back to a rancheria. And there are indigenous rights in Alaska that are tied into hunting, particularly on federal lands and national parks, that allow people to do subsistence hunting. Yukon Charlie is a really good example of that in the northeast part of Alaska. But there isn't enough.
No.
And you've got to put people in a position to tell their story and not have people like me tell that story.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely one for another day, to find someone to tell their story. I'll go back to being an educator then. Go back on track a little bit. So I had a look at your bio, and you have taught all over the world in all sorts of amazing settings. And it looks like you have done some indoor and outdoor kind of stuff. What is it that you love about education outdoors? What do you think the impact is on the students and on those facilitating the education that is different from when you're indoors?
I think teachers have an extraordinary challenge to try and teach anything indoors with 30 people in the classroom.
Yeah. So
I think I'm very lucky to have had an outdoor career. And I think the beauty of the outdoors is it gets real. It's not conceptual. It particularly with science, the idea of investigation and discovery and kids prompting themselves in their exploration is a really key piece to making it valuable, because then they own it. Yeah. There's a difference between talking about a frog's life cycle on a really good PowerPoint and then somebody jumping in and catching one of these ginormous bullfrogs that we have and holding it up and being like, look what I got. And they're giant. They're these huge, monstrous apex predators that kill everything else. And yeah, it's real in the outdoors. And then the tactile piece of on your skin and on your face, or having to be responsible by putting a rain jacket on and understanding layering and just getting fundamental living skills. That's the sort of adjunct to any lesson. It's life skills. Any science lesson can have an element of life skill in there, which makes it more meaningful, because so much of learning for young people is disconnected from their real life.
I totally hear that. That's so aligned with what we're trying to do. It's that idea of like all learning should be part of the curriculum. It's not just what you sit in a classroom and get taught. Like everything you do is learning. It's all valuable and it's all part of your journey.
And I think for a lot of kids, not all kids, there's kids who love just sitting and hammering out a book, and that's great, but there's a significant proportion of kids that need a slightly different angle. But a lot of education is geared to that book. A lot of education is geared to production line, and that's the nature of large classrooms. That's the nature of one teacher, 30 kids. I talk about educational reform a lot with donors, and I have an argument that educational reform isn't legislation. It's simply inspiring kids to be interested in learning. Because as soon as they do that, they can overcome just about everything. Because they find their groove, and I want to learn more about that. I want to learn more about that. I want to learn more about that.
You don't learn if you're not happy. Like joy is like so central to learning, and I think that's quite often missed.
Well, you've hit a really good point, because at its heart, kids are emotional beings. They're trying to learn how to deal with their emotions, and you're in the classroom and it's like, woo! You got to suppress that. Like, I got a minute. Yeah, you can't be a bit rowdy. But actually, the rowdiness is the thing that is engagement sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the bit that's like, oh my goodness, have you seen this? Oh, I'm so excited. I want to share it with someone else. Whereas if that's not allowed, then
yeah. I think
non-participation is sometimes people processing. Like if a kid doesn't put their hand up to engage, maybe they're just processing on a totally different level.
I think it's nature has that ability to inspire, like awe, you know, like when you've got this awesome bullfrog in your hands and it's there croaking in front of you, it's like, wow, you know, and the way that sparks something like deeper inside you and cements that experience in your mind, I think is a really powerful part of the journey. And what are the barriers that you facing the other side of the pond to kind of keep this work up that you're doing? What are there political barriers? You were saying about the kind of access in certain areas is one kind of political barrier. Are there any other barriers out there that are constraining the ability to kind of promote the success that you're doing?
Well, alternative facts don't help. The idea that science isn't science, like that definitely is a little bit of a barrier to get over. I think that nobody's quite cracked how to use technology yet in an effective way, because we try to get kids to put their phones down, but they use their phones for everything. So how do we use it for GIS? How do we use it for photo essays? How do we use it for sound sampling? Nobody's actually found a way to really effectively do that, apart from letting them run out of battery. But then they don't have anything to record their event with. And so I see that as a sort of challenge. Money, like how do you finance? These are not cheap programs. In the US, we have vast distances to cover. And I also think there's this generational disconnect, is that the plasticized world of social media, which creates this pristine, clean vision of the ideal life, being covered in mud and like jumping around with dragonflies isn't necessarily fit in that narrative. And so finding a way to crack that. So I have some optimism with that, because social media ebbs and flows. So whatever the next one might be, a nature focus.
It's funny, isn't it, how, you know, in a lot of marketing and what have you, you know, to advertise shampoo, they drift off into nature while they're washing their hair, and you know, they use nature and that kind of scene like so much to promote their products that are kind of anti-nature products, and yeah, it feels a very strange kind of juxtaposition there of the two elements. But it'd be interesting to see how much, you know, I've seen a lot more adverts increase about visiting national parks and those kind of places. So I think it's about the environmentalist movement kind of adapting to those new ways and finding a way to reach people in a different thing. And I think through the phones and through the different media channels and how we kind of promote and engage with nature and promote these benefits through those channels, if that's what people are engaging in, is certainly a challenge we're trying to face here, and can definitely identify with that.
And I also think there's a need to understand how different cultures and different parts of society engage with the outdoors. And I have a colleague of mine going back decades, Pammy Johal, who's based in Scotland, who works very specifically within her community to find people that look like each other, to support each other and make it friendly and make it open. And I think that we all have to try to figure out ways to make this a welcome place for everybody. And I think there's a lot of, my experience has been at times, particularly in the outdoor world, a lot of snobbery and bias that might not be outright said, but it's there, that doesn't make it a welcome.
White middle class world, can't it?
Oh yeah,
outdoor world.
I'm highly educated. English is my first language. University, all these pieces, they're all privilege, and I think
a lot of that's down to the like access requires equipment quite often.
Yeah,
we'll certainly think it does. That's the perception, and I think that is a big barrier, isn't it? There's a big cost to buying the right equipment to be able to access it in the way that people see it portrayed.
And the irony is that when I started off, I wore pretty much a plastic bag and a pair of running shoes and some cotton like PE kit. Was like that was our outfit for the outdoors. And then it became that you're gonna have a terrible accident in that. And we didn't actually. We got cold. It got pretty uncomfortable. but we survived. We built resilience, and we're only walking up and down the fell. It's going to be fine. And I think there's too much focus on gear. And the other piece within that is so many outdoors people, if you go in their houses, they have like 8 jackets and 9 rain jackets. They have all these different generations of equipment, and it's all neat. It's all really dry. And I think that's the single biggest thing you can do is build an inventory of gear that you can loan to give people the backup, not to learn through a wet experience, but learn in a positive way how to be in a maritime environment in the fall. It's there needs to be a generosity of spirit.
That's really interesting. That's something that Ivan Illich talks about in Deschooling Society, is these kind of little community nodes that help support each other with gear or access to information or education. I think you really hit something there, that
I think it was
you can rally around a bit more and help make it accessible.
Yeah.
I did see an advert for an Airbnb style business where people could hire out their camping gear, so you don't have to invest in the whole clobber. I thought that's a part of the ways for going there.
I mean, I've got 3 tents in my garage at any given time, and you think, God, what a waste! Like someone could be using one of those tents right now, but it's just sat in my garage instead.
I like the idea. It's the skiing. Like when I grew up in Britain, skiing was totally inaccessible. Like finance-wise, perception-wise. Why do you want to go off whipping down the hills, a bunch of toffs, all of that sort of stuff? And then I came to the United States, and there were people skiing in like dungarees and plaid shirts. And I thought, oh wow, I could get into this. and then lo and behold, people had ski boots, they had skis, and they had woolly hats. And pretty much my first 4 or 5 years of skiing, I did for less than $100 because people were giving me gear. And I think skiing is a particular one that has so much joy in it and so much unaffordability at the same time, and yet with the right mentorship or the right doorways, you can discover this great crazy world out there.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Do you over here we've got quite a generational shift with our young people, very, very conscious of climate change and quite a lot of anxiety around it, but also a lot more engagement with the natural world as a result of that. I don't know if you've found the same in America.
I think there's more engagement because it's undeniable. If you live in the Western United States, then you have not escaped wildfire. If you're in that school age group, you may well have known people who've evacuated, known people who've lost their house, and you've lived a short enough life, but long enough to see winters decline. And you can either buy into a political narrative or you can read around other stuff. And the majority of articles are showing the science. I think the challenge is to move from a selfish society to a selfless society. And children at their very earliest moment, as you know, are inherently selfless. They'll share the sand bucket, they'll share their toys, there'll be some grabbing and tugging and stuff, but that's where they learn to share. And then teenagers, if they aren't reinforced, start to drift into selfish. And if you're a selfish 18-year-old, that doesn't give you a lot of optimism for the planet. And I think you're right about people starting to understand a little bit more that they can change things. And that's why I think as adults, we have to be more hopeful in our narrative, in our dialogue. Because if we don't offer hope and we just offer horror, there's no incentive.
I think that's completely. I think when we have these like negative behaviors, like not sharing and what have you, they tend to be a fear-based reaction. And I think that is a sign of us not kind of meeting that need of, like you're saying, reinforcing and supporting them in the kind of potentially adolescence or wherever it stems from being able to share and, get along in the sandpit. And where does that where does that fear stem from, and how do we kind of support those challenges and support those learners and help them navigate those emotional difficulties that fears bring? And I think that's a big piece of work.
I think if you expect more of kids as well, I think you've seen it. Once you give children a responsibility and you give them the chance to fail and they go, oh, I kind of blew it, can I have another go?
Yeah.
Most kids are able to step their game up.
Yeah.
And that kid who fails might need 2 or 3 goes to get there. But there's very few kids who totally fail responsibility. It's adults that are failing to truly give them responsibility.
I think as well it's that, and if they give them responsibility and they do fail, it's coaching through that expectation of what is a failure, and it is part of learning, and it's expected, and it's okay, and that it doesn't need to be something. You don't have to have that fear of failure.
Failure is really ingrained though, isn't it? Like, I've spent the last 10 years saying to my kids, you're not going to get it right first time. It's fine. But they're still like, oh, I did it wrong. Don't want to do it again. And it's like, it's a constant reaffirming. Reaffirming. No, it's fine. Just try again.
One of my best experiences as a little kid, I must have been like 8 or 9, was I was in a Cub Scout soccer team, and we were awful. We would win the cup for the best sports because we would get stuffed by every team. I remember our side losing like 12-0. There was no mercy rule. We played a full 90 minutes. They stuffed all the goals up. And I remember my dad and the other parents laughing uncontrollably on the side because we were so bad. And that was such a wonderful thing because we still enjoyed the game, but it showed it didn't really matter. We were still trying to score. We're running up and down. But the idea of this entertainment in massive failure, I've remembered that so many times as an adult, and that was a real gift.
Yeah.
How does that inform your approach with your project?
Well, I'm running a $55 million build in one of the most prestigious, iconic parks in the system. And I took a part-time job in 2005, and I'm still on it. Well, I'm on a full-time job now in 2022. And we built some buildings, and we've got maybe a third of it done, and got a lot of planning to do. And so I'm very patient. Like, failure is failure. Most of the time we fail. It's only a few times we succeed. And so that's the way I look at it, is every day I get a little bit closer, and you just struggle through it. With a little bit of humor helps, and you cry a little bit sometimes because it's very complex and a bit overwhelming. But the end goal is a really good thing, to build a school in a national park where you have in perpetuity a home for young people, scaled for young people, designed specifically for young people, without any adult sizing, will be an extraordinary legacy for our organization.
Can you tell us a bit more about the school then? So, like, when it is finished, who do you envisage attending? Will it be like a full-time school? Just tell us about it.
Well, it's K through 12, so kindergarten through high school.
Okay.
And we run in the school year with about 250 schools in state, and they come to do an overnight based program that's typically field science based with ESL, emotional social learning content. And we have a high scholarship fund. We work to underwrite any school that is financially not able to attend. So we could spend $800,000 to $1 million in scholarship on a big year. And then it'll also become essentially a think space, a place for universities, nonprofits, other providers to come together to give programs. So I think sometimes the struggle in nonprofits, I don't know if you've had this with your organization, where you get really excited about something and you go, oh, we've got to do this, we've got to do this, we've got to do this. And you get bigger and bigger, and then you realize your core thing that you're really good at is getting ignored because you got sort of distracted a little bit. And we as an organization know that we can't best serve the veteran community. There are groups that can do that. We know we can't serve groups that are learning English as a second language. We're going to work in partnership with other groups that do that and become essentially a facilitator of the space. And it's letting go of the ego of being everything. That's what's going to make our campus a success.
You are already. Oh, sorry, you go, Shev.
I was just saying that's it's so interesting to hear you kind of explain the journey that way, because I feel like for me that I'm kind of right at the start of that. It's like we're just big enough as an organization to start letting go of some of those things and starting to recognize that partnership working. And I really echo what you're saying there. It's really, really interesting.
Our brand should be cooperation, not this idea of contrast. It's how do you work with scouting groups, and how do you work with LGBTQ groups, and how do you work, like, how do you support all of that? Because that huge mixed ball of things makes us all stronger. It's what nature is, as you know.
Absolutely. I think with that diversity and that inclusion of all the different stakeholders, all the different organizations, will only build strength and understanding. It's really important, especially as the world gets smaller through these gadgets and what have you, to have those larger links and understanding that kind of wider community and the bigger picture that those other organizations can support each other in. I think it's really important to build those connections, and like Shev says, that's a journey we're about to embark on with other local NGOs and charities and what have you. And it's really exciting step, because they've also been thinking about some of the problems that we're trying to solve, but different parts of the puzzle.
It's community, not competition, right?
Yeah. When I was living up in the Northwest, there was a small newspaper up in a little town called Squim, and it's in this area of massive rainfall. It's this bit of prairie land. Instead of getting 160 inches of rain a year, it gets 11 inches of rain a year. It's this little sun belt, and they have a newspaper. And I grabbed the newspaper one time, and there was an obituary for someone, and it was talking about how great this guy was. And his motto, I kept the paper. His motto was, "It's amazing what you can achieve in life when you don't care who gets the credit." And I think that's if you can. I don't always get to that point. I'll admit that ego comes in, but I aspire to that. And I think that idea of how do we do greater good and how do we build off that is this thing that maybe we need to reinvigorate in society.
I totally agree. Yeah. I mean, I've always tried to explain it as, I've always seen like true power is the empowerment of others. It is giving away what you've got and making everyone around you better. And if you can kind of hold that, that's that very similar concept, is like just give of yourself to make everyone better, then you're onto a winner.
And it comes back to young people. I'm an older white guy who's going to stand up there and tell them this is the way it is. That's completely crazy. Like, I'm the generation that broke everything. So I think saying and modeling and trying to inspire and give over, but not sort of not to a point where you're walking away and going, you're here, like figure out. It requires us to be a bit quieter in the room and not be the first person talking, or to say, wow, that's a really different way of doing it, and not say, well, you can give it a go, but say, how do we make, what do you want me to do? I think there's a lot of nuance and subtlety in being an active partner over somebody who's just along for the ride.
Yeah.
And one of the things I value in my time in the United States has been the positivity that a lot of people have in America, which maybe you don't see as much in Europe because of media. But it's quite extraordinary what people can do as a community to try and help each other. Right now, as I said, nearly 4,000 people are displaced, and the whole town is trying to figure out ways to work it. And then that transfers as well into like the workplace where, if I was working in Britain, I don't think I would have got anywhere near the opportunities I got in the United States, because people were like, give it a go. It's a very Australian phrase, give it a go. But there is an openness to try things and do things differently and not be governed by class or by this is the way we've always done things. How do we interrupt? I look at your organization and, wow, you're an interrupter. Like, what you're trying to do is fundamentally change the way a group of people are served in education. That interruption is a powerful thing. You've got to keep doing that, because that's what advocacy is to speak for those who can't speak and let them find their voice. That's such a beautiful gift. I love that.
I saw this great thing which was talking about kids benefiting from the outdoors, and it was saying we don't just need the kids of the parents that love to be outdoors. We need all kids outdoors, and I kind of feel like that's what Tom and Shev are aiming to do. We're not just approaching the middle class white parents and being like, oh, come and bring your toddlers to play in the woods. We're trying to reach all the kids, regardless of where they come from or what their parents enjoy doing, and getting everyone outside, right?
Yeah, and to be willing to change the way that we fundamentally do things, because there's a different cultural aspect that needs to be supportive and reflected. It's the outdoors. The great thing about the outdoors is you meet it on its terms, not my terms. It's a very democratic thing. A storm is incredibly democratic at the very start. It might be low-lying areas have low-income people, so they get flooded out. That's a fundamental flaw in democracy. But what I'm saying is we're all affected by that same storm. It doesn't look at one person and go, oh, you're not going to get as wet as that person, unless they've got the different rain jacket. But
Absolutely.
I like the fact that it levels the playing field.
Do you know, the other thing I really love about it is this idea that you can pit yourself against nature, but you can't beat nature. So what it does when you approach the challenge of being outdoors, you teach yourself something about yourself, because nature's not going to change. It's not going to bend to your will. So you have to go yourself on this kind of transformational journey. I think there's something hugely powerful about that ability of kind of wilderness and outdoor space to teach you about yourself.
Well, humility. It's that between a rock and a hard place, and a rock and a hard place always wins. It pushes you back, and I like the fact that the environment, nature, natural forces, no matter what we do, when water decides to go in a certain direction at a certain level, there's nothing we can do to stop it. And so there's always this surprise at the effect of floods. And I always find myself going, well, if you build on a floodplain, or you really like that thing next to the creek, and we've got massive climate change happening, and the river's going to go, you shouldn't be surprised that your third Airbnb is flooded out. Like, that's the nature of the beast. And then now it's more unpredictable when those events are happening, but the predictable part is it will happen. and so I like the fact nature doesn't necessarily, it bites back, and we don't have anything to meet it with apart from humility.
Yeah, I think that's a hugely powerful learning opportunity.
And a rediscovery of metaphor, I think, is a really good thing as well, particularly for young people. I think the reason myth plays such an important part in so many cultures is it has this this journey that people go on. It captures the idea of this ascent from child to adult, maybe, or development of a whole person. And kids are crying out for a little bit of myth. And I love the idea of the outdoors at its rawest, no matter where you are, having mythical proportions. And it doesn't need necessarily to be dressed up with role playing or anything. It can be for a little kid trudging a mile through a muddy track, and they get to go home, and that mile gets traversed into, like, I just walked 15 miles uphill and 15 miles uphill back, sort of Monty Pythonish. But like, it's the reestablish of these mythical experiences is really important, because those are the bits that glow very brightly as they become adults, and they harken back to them and they draw strength from them. And storytelling is like such a critical part of that. It's kids discovering stories that are real and not plastic. Like a kid starting a fire with a bow drill and creating fire is that moment is just, their eyes get so big, like, I did this, and they blow it and like, oh my God. And the metaphor at that moment is undeniable. They'll always have that skill.
Yeah. Amazing.
Well, they're doing better than I have. All I've ever produced is sweat and smoke and bad language.
Which is also mythical, because they talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
They go back and they say the words that we used. I never knew those words.
How do you use these experiences and this kind of concept around myth and nature and their experience? Is there a way you take that into your approach when you're working with young people? Do you help encourage them to be able to articulate their story and help through that help them gain their understanding and their relationship in the context of nature?
I think there's a place for it. I think as long as you're not contriving it too much. Like for us, people leave 3,800 feet is the valley floor, and then they trek up these winding trails up 2,000, 3,000 feet to the valley rim, and they're next to the second or third largest waterfall in North America. It's this mythical proportion, this ascent. It speaks for itself. I know in my experience of working with young people, and as I got into my 30s, I got to that point with young people where I was too young to be old, but I was also too old, if that makes sense, to be young. It's like it got to the point where I wasn't quite there, and I went back and worked a course in my 40s, and it was really different. And at that point, I was a sage. I was like old, gray. I had a beard. Like, oh, there's an old guy rowing a boat. Oh yeah, he's wise. And we were on this journey down the river, down the Yampa, or the Green River in Utah. And it completely fit into this idea of a journey, and each stop had symbolism. And you don't necessarily do it from the Iliad or something, but we went through these pieces of a group storming, norming, forming, storming, norming, like any other group. And that's all part of that journey. And they have a period of isolation. We do solo with them, and they reflect on where they're at and what they would bring back to the group. And so it's ceremony and symbolism. Another thing that kids really like, they need that sort of opportunity to, I think, to speak out and be heard to. And if you have it in that symbolic setup, everybody understands the rules, and then it's easier to listen.
Yeah.
So I think I had colleagues when Star Wars, when the sort of big movie blockbusters were out, I had colleagues who took their entire course and based it on scripts from movies. And so they would use like Star Wars quotes over 3 weeks, and all the readings were Yoda. And they had other ones that, I mean, it shows you how old I am. They had Braveheart. So we did a whole one based around Braveheart. And I don't know, it wasn't my style, but they had a really good time.
Yes.
I think embrace that creativity. And we talked about failure, is do those things and then go, well, that didn't go as I planned. Maybe we won't do that next time. And yeah, so I think kids are just this awesome sponge where they're resilient and they're forgiving and they're super fun and they're incredibly challenging and drive you nuts, but they're kids.
Yeah. As a kind of person heading up this project, do you still get quite a lot of hands-on time with kids to do?
I don't.
No.
Mostly... No. I went back actually, and I taught a Armed Forces Veterans program in the Glades last fall, which is my return to Outward Bound. And that group I feel really connected with, and I think that's where my skills at. I don't have the resilience to be as good as I want to be with kids And I think I might get back into it. I think another couple of years where I'll be in my 60s, and I think I'll be even more sage-like at that point. Then I think I might have a sort of renaissance at that time.
Okay.
But I'm very committed at the moment to use my skill set to get this school off the ground.
Yeah.
And which is that other part is you play to your skills. And I discovered that I still teach probably. I had the days a month a year. I teach adult classes in swiftwater rescue and search and rescue, and I go to other national parks and I teach modules for the Park Service. But I still love, but I love doing what I do now, which is trying to get this school off the ground. And my skill set right now is political and project management, figuring how to get stuff done on a curvy path.
You said about getting it off the ground, but you've also said that you've got people coming in already, so it's obviously operating in some function.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
We operate probably post-COVID 180 students a day right now.
It's just not where you want it to be yet.
Right, and we'll go back up to the sort of 300 plus as we sort of go through this next COVID piece. But this campus is 224 beds. It'll increase our capacity significantly.
Yeah, awesome. That's so exciting.
Very exciting.
I'm aware that you're a really busy man, and obviously you've been up all night as well. Is there anything you wanted to tell us that we haven't talked about, or Tom and Shev, is there anything you wanted to ask Moose before I ask one last question?
I'd just like to know what the next step is for your project. What's the next hurdle you're trying to overcome, or what's the next element of the project phase?
The next one is probably raising $11 to $15 million to build a 2-story gear shed, commercial kitchen, and dining room. We've got an interim dining room. That's probably the next big one. And I've done all the investigative digging on it and figured out where the rock is. But that's a large amount of money.
Yeah.
What would that enable you to do that you aren't doing already?
That enables us to bump to 224, because right now dining room only deals with 60.
Sure.
So we the phase is that next big building lets us really embrace the full build out of all the dormitories. And I think that the other challenge in there is one of the things that we're working on is figuring out how to be equitable with space. So looking at our design of our dining rooms that we did 8 years ago, and looking at our design of dining rooms, not dining rooms, our restrooms, what we did 10 years ago and what we need now are two different things. And so figuring out ways to accommodate every identity is a critical part of the next design phase. So that's a little bit I'm sort of working on right now.
Awesome.
Cool.
And remaining incredibly optimistic is the other thing that I have to keep doing.
It's all about being optimistic, right?
Yeah, it is. There are definitely days that you throw stuff at the wall. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I wanted to ask you about juggling, which I know is
well, that was my next question, Shev.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't let you guys go without talking about juggling, because Moose, Shev and Tom are both jugglers as well. So I thought that was definitely worth a quick
chat. So you juggle
chat.
as a team? Are you juggling as a team?
Yeah.
Oh. And you put kids in the middle and juggle around them?
Only in chainsaws.
Oh my goodness. Well, my juggling career was when I was a river guide, and when I was on the road, and I would juggle and use my Diablo, that giant spinning top. It's kind of up in my office right now, and I don't juggle nearly enough now. But it's what a great it's a great tool to just start the conversation with kids, because every kid can juggle one board just about. So I used it a lot to break down the communication barrier. There's a village in the southern Kalahari that has this strange juggling culture probably right now. That is probably because I went through there and blew their minds one day. And we went there twice actually. And the second time they turned up, there were kids just throwing stones from one hand to the other and demonstrating that they had it down.
That's so cool. I had a similar experience in Bariloche in Argentina.
Yeah.
We stood up there with some family friends, and we were all just juggling on the village green, and it's now become an annual juggling festival. And they make their own juggling clubs out of plastic bottles and stuff, and it's become this amazing thing in the town. It's really cool.
Oh, that's that gift of laughter and that connection that is so important, because laughter's that first piece within actually breaking down barriers. It's the point at which most people are starting to feel more comfortable.
Yeah. Drop your defenses quite quickly.
Yeah, I've laughed very hard with juggling. A friend took me to a big juggling conference in the southeast of the United States, and I said, "Where are we sleeping?" And he's like, "Oh, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out." And we went to the first day, and I was like, "Where are we sleeping?" We're in this Charlotte. We're in a big metropolitan area, and he's like, "We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out." And where we were sleeping was at the venue. Outside it with the sound of gunshots and people running up and down the alley and car chases. And I was like, I don't feel safe. And he's like, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. We're good. We're jugglers. We're going to be okay. And we were. It was fine. You know, we went to the second day. We weren't shot. We weren't like mugged or anything. It was fantastic. I ultimately had a positive experience. I'm not scarred by it and still talking about it 25, 30 years later.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Moose, today. I've really
pleasure.
enjoyed chatting to you. I'm just going to quickly finish by asking you, I've asked Tom and Shev this in the past. I'm not asking them. I'm just going to ask you 3 questions quickly, if you've got time. And the first is, how do you relax?
Always in the water. So we have a world-class river 15 minutes away from our house, and I can put my boat on the water and I can paddle. It's a bit low. It's very low right now, but I can still paddle up and down the pools and just zone out to my canoe paddle up and down pools.
Nice. And what are you reading or listening to right now?
The Emerald Mile.
Do you see we all lean forward then?
Yeah, the Emerald Mile. It's the fastest descent of the Grand Canyon. There was a massive snowpack melt, and illegally these guys put on the river, and it's 200 miles or something, and the Grand Canyon is the biggest water I've ever been on, and they proceed to just go on this fantastic multi-hour push to go what normally takes 20 days in a matter of hours.
Wow.
And it captures the American spirit in a very real way of, it's running real high, let's go do it, without necessarily thinking through the consequences. Yeah.
Awesome. And finally, why is being outdoors important to you?
Because it feeds your soul. We're outdoor animals that are constrained by cubicles for most of our life and asked to do things that anatomically don't make sense. And the outdoors allows you to shake all that off. And it shouldn't be a privilege. It should be there. It should be joyful. It should have purpose, and it should be available to everybody. There's nothing better than standing on the shore and having that North Atlantic wind with the spray hit you on the face. It's the greatest thing. Or to be like, for me, like being up in the mountains or being on a big river, it's suddenly everything seems to be singing the song I want to sing.
Gosh, I totally agree. Absolutely agree. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And keep doing all this work. I mean it. I sort of monitor the British system from afar, and I kind of look at all the failures that I felt I experienced in outdoor ed because they didn't have the pieces of paper, or they didn't like my experience or anything. And I look at your program, and it's one of the few programs I'm like, oh, that is totally intriguing. That is absolutely what I would be interested in doing. And I mean it when I say I'm inspired by that. And if you guys are out in the United States, feel free to give me a shout.
Well, the same. If you ever make it to Devon, we'll put you up, show you around.
Thank you. I miss Devon because I went to college in Plymouth, and that whole part of the country is. Oh.
Yeah, we are very lucky.
All right. Well, look, it was great meeting you all.
Yeah, really nice to connect.
Good luck, and remain super smashing great.
Thanks, Moose.
Yeah, I hope you stay safe. Your community is going to be all right after this, all the fires and everything. You know, our hearts going out to you guys, and just thinking of you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right. Have a great day.
Thanks, Moose. You too. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cheers.
A big thank you again to Moose for joining us, particularly so early his time, so that we could connect across the pond with the time zones. And thanks to Tom and Shev for taking a bit of time out of their days to join that conversation as well. I found it really interesting, and I thought we covered a lot, and I hope that those of you listening enjoyed it as well. Thanks for tuning in once more, and join us again in a fortnight for our next episode. Thanks very much.